Episode 59, The Mystery of Golgotha. Suddenly my knees gave up. They hit the ground, while my eyesight was becoming blurry. My body started again to shake in an uncontrollable way, and I felt that something was brutally set on my head, something I did not see coming, but the sharp spikes caused me great pain on the moment. I felt the small rivers of blood on my forehead, my eyelids, and my cheeks. Someone laughed. I do not understand what happened to me. Taking advantage that I was kneeling on the ground, two men placed a very heavy piece of wood across my back, while spreading my arms for two other men to tie them with ropes. It was the trunk of a tree, still rough, on which they were going to nail me to. This painful position caused me some to moan. The wood was so heavy and my back was a bleeding wound. Orders were given, screamed, chopped. I did not understand what they were saying, but I got the impression that there were some discussions, that not everybody agreed on what had to be done. I tried to find some rest for a short time, eyes closed, trying to control my breathing. Then there were noises of steps, the clanking of chains, and some complaints too. Obviously, I was not going to be the only one to be tortured. Perhaps it was a way to tell the people of Jerusalem that I was not more important than any other criminals. It probably also was a way to dilute my case among others. Who were these new ones? Lestes? Brigands? Zealots? I did not know, but they were still humans, and I remember asking my father, Awun, to help them as much as me. What could I do more than that, which was not in opposition to what must have been carved in the memory of that day? While directing my thoughts to these two beings, whose face I could not see, I realized that none of the prayers which were with me since the beginning could raise to my consciousness. I was so exhausted and the pain was so acute that all the words of the prayers were disassembling. I only had my heart left to pray, a raw heart that I let jump towards the raging suffering that I was feeling behind me and on my sides. Finally, a soldier gave an order, and I was lifted under my arms and by the pieces of wood. According to the tradition, I was going to walk spread and loaded to the place of my execution, but first by having to go through a few streets to show what it costs to challenge Rome. The Sanhedrin had nothing to do with the crucifixion, since they used the lapidation to execute their enemies. I started taking a few steps, as much as I was able to, each step requiring an enormous effort. I remember that after leaving the courtyard where I suffered the flagrum, I tried to stand up and raise myself as much as possible. The Christic Energy was requesting it, and despite my weakness, I could feel the intense energy forcing me to be proud. It was out of question that the temple, the body, was not as expected by the energy. Ahead of me, a group of soldiers was pushing the crowds and opening a passage for us. Among them, there was a colossus, and in front of the group, riding a white horse, a man draped in red, holding a banner. It was like that, a procession whose purpose was to mark the last days of Easter, combining sacrifices and will of domination. Something subtle in the fundamental spirit of that two cultures, sacrifices and domination. When I entered the first street, I saw Simon and one of the Heliopolis brothers, frozen in fear. I saw them moving away and causing some commotions among the crowd. I was touched to see them here, but at the same time, something was trying to take me away from that scene. I did not know how my body was standing. Perhaps my stature, my will, perhaps my love sent by heaven that was so tied to my soul that I ignored the insults sent here and there by the crowd. The Romans were getting insulted too, and one of them replied by spitting and hitting back with the flat of his sword. Suddenly, my temples on the side of my head started aching. My vision became blurry, and I fell face on the ground, squashed by the weight of the wood across my shoulders. I was unable to stand up, and I was blind. Some soldiers grabbed me and helped me kneel on the ground. My back was almost paralyzed, and I was trying to regain my breath. When my vision came back, I noticed on the ground in front of me pieces of acacia branches. It was these that they had placed on my head before. Someone took them and slapped them brutally back on my head. I had just the time to see that their assembly was forming a crown. Through my hair, the long spikes hurt me again. It was my crown of Messiah. What an irony. Finally, the soldiers lifted me completely and the procession resumed, accompanied with the neighing of the leading horse. At one moment, as we were getting close to a well where I had taught often, I heard screams and whips being cracked behind me. Was it because of the crowd or one of the tortured who could no longer walk? I tried stopping, but the soldier prevented me. Move on! Faster! I kept moving, but faster I could not do it. Quite the contrary, I could feel my back bending under the load, despite all my willingness. Then there were stairs to climb. I almost did it, on my knees, slowly, so that I could regain my breath. This walk was endless. Sometimes in the crowd, I could see some familiar faces. Peter, Barthélemy, Eleazar, who had cut his hair, and many others who could not understand what was going on. I also saw some women hiding under their veils so as not to be recognized. It was better this way, and that was answering the request from the brothers of Heliopolis. A very short instant, I recognized the faces of my mother and my wife Miriam. They were livid, and their suffering was indescribable. I had anticipated that moment. It was the most difficult to withstand, although from the beginning I had decided to not be affected. I was hoping them to make them understand that the Christic energy was still inside me and that things were happening as planned. I gathered all my strength to send them a smile. My mother Miriam understood what was happening because of that complicity of our souls. But for Miriam, my wife, it was too much for her. And then it was Yakuba that I recognized, terrorized, and hiding under the frame of a door. A few more steps, and I stumbled. Not as bad as the first time. I did not bang my forehead on the ground this time. I raised my head with a long moaning of pain. Shlomit was there, a few steps away from me. Her face was expressing a complete devastation. I do not know how she found the will, but she grabbed a white veil from an old woman and came towards me. In a second, she wiped my face from the blood and the sweat. Her action was so quick that even the soldiers could not do anything to stop her. They did nothing. Come on, move! My answer to the Roman soldier was to smile to him. not to defy him or mock him. I wasn't able to do that. I did it simply because I could only see in him a child lost in time, a child whose life was so far away from the moment when he would understand what he was participating at. It was like that. My nature had always pushed me to behave like this towards the people who were hurting or insulting me. I was just trying to imprint my gaze into theirs so that one day in the eternity, its glitter and tenderness would be revealed in them and invite them to be better and softer. They would not know where the gaze was coming from, but it would be for them a source of life in its immensity. Hiding behind his shield, the Roman soldier quickly turned away his head, but I knew that I had reached my target. I came back in the presence of my flesh and started walking again. The walls of Jerusalem and the gate seemed so far away. It would never end. Unexpectedly, the sun came back in the sky, detached, almost cruel. I remember calling Awun at that moment, a little bit like a small boy who searched for the hand of his father. My body was hurting so much. I tried taking a pause to calm the beating of my heart, but they pushed me, unless my feet stumbled in my robe. One more time I felt and lost consciousness for a few seconds. Screams, orders, voices, tears, and even the barking of a dog helped me regain consciousness. A man with dark skin was offering to carry the heavy piece of wood for me. He was arguing with the soldiers. The Colossus, who was walking ahead, prevented him from doing so. In pain, I tried to turn my head to look around me. In the small street, gathered in front of the closed shops, it was groups of crying women and beggars. And suddenly, the faces of Yusuf, Jacob, Simon, and Levi appeared to me. They tried to tell me something. In vain. Finally, I arrived at the foot of the walls near the gate leading to the fields of the tortured. A small pass, full of stones, twisty, where nothing was growing, was leading to that field. Multiple times I thought that I would not manage to make it to the end of that pass. My back was an enormous wound, and between two strikes of pain, I could feel the blood run along my legs. I needed to pray. I needed it. But nothing of constructed could come out of me. I wanted to call Elohim behind my eyelids half shut. Where was he? Was his ship going to put an end to all this? I have to say that for a moment, on that narrow pass, I no longer understood what was being played. The fire, the air, the water, and the earth were macerating, boiling in my flesh. And then finally we arrived at the location. A few poles were planted in the ground, memories of the last atrocities that took place. There were a lot of soldiers, and they were preventing a large crowd of men and women to get too close to the poles. Among the crowd, there were loving and compassionate souls, some carrying a message, others just curious, some negative or even perverted. I could easily spot these. The soldiers were controlling the crowd, pushing them backward. I was wondering if my mother and my wife were somewhere in the crowd. It was better that they did not make it. While the soldiers are waiting for the rest of the procession and the other tortured, I noticed the silhouette of my uncle Yusuf. He was distributing some coins to the soldiers. I observed him, and when I saw his face, it was a mix of craziness and wisdom, halfway between total distress and measure. I wanted so much to tell him one word, just one word. Finally, I saw two men, half naked and covered in blood, between a few soldiers holding their spears. Everything was going to accelerate. The sun was still there, with a gusty wind, neither warm or cold. I then saw a small man coming towards me, accompanied by a few soldiers. His face was sad, and he was limping. He seemed incredibly miserable, with his dirty loincloth and his disheveled hair. He was holding some tools. He was thus responsible for the work. Father, I could not prevent myself to whisper this while observing that man. Father, why him? This is too much for the poor soul. At that point, something created a knot in my body. Yes, something that was the primal fear experienced by my executioner. That fear, his fear, came and lodged itself in my stomach. Never had I imagined or felt that I could be one day overwhelmed by this visceral terror. It was the terror of the flesh, which is trying to hide behind some ultimate walls, without perceiving anything besides an abominable suffering. My body started again to shake uncontrollably, like under the blows of the flagon. It was impossible to avoid. Oh no, I told myself, I'm not that flesh. I'm not that beast who is terrified. I needed to take over. It was necessary for the Christic Energy to explode inside me more than it had never done it. It was necessary that its love, our love, embrace everything. Wondering that interrogation finally helped me recenter. No, I was not this animal skin that had been lent to me. I was the sun. Without seeing them coming, two soldiers untied the ropes that was attaching a large piece of wood to my back. It was a sudden but illusory feeling of being able to breathe. Turn over. I obeyed their order. In front of me, a decurion was standing. Using his sword, he quickly enlarged the neck of my robe and stripped me naked. I was not surprised. It was customary to humiliate publicly the people that were going to be executed. With me, that was not working. If I had always been discreet with my body, the nudity had never bothered me. I was simply cold. The sun had turned a milky white, and a little breeze was blowing. Behind me, I heard some banging on the ground. With the help of a notch, they just finished to tie the heavy piece of wood I was carrying to a tree trunk, still rough. The little man who was going to nail me was crouching near the cross, doing all he could to avoid my gaze. I remember taking 2 steps in his direction and crouching next to him, naked. It was not necessary for the decurion to push me on the ground. Very slowly then, with 1,000 pains, I tried to slide on my side towards the wood cross that was destined for me. When I placed my back full of open wounds on the rough bark of the trunk, the suffering became unbearable. My raw flesh was stilled by the rugosity of the leftover bark. Then two soldiers on each side spread my arms and kept them against the wooden joist. The crowd became quiet at that moment. It was also the moment for me to meet straight in the eyes the man who was going to drive a few nails in my flesh. It was necessary. The Christic energy in me wanted to recognize him absolutely, beyond time, so that I could heal him from the wound that he was going to receive. A wound much more redoubtable, much more important than mine. For a few minutes he escaped me, preferring to let two other men attach me to the joist by tying two ropes under my armpits. The goal was to maintain my chest against the trunk and prevent my body from sagging forward. Finally, in a notch designed for that purpose, they placed a piece of wood between my legs so that it could be used as a seat once the cross would be erected. Everything was carefully designed. It was simply the repetition of acts performed hundreds of times without a trace of emotion. After trying to capture the eyes of my executioner, I managed to seize him and did not release him in his distress. His name emerged by itself in the back of my consciousness. Thus, it is you, Nathanael. The man jumped, frightened to have been penetrated in his mind. To reassure him, I tried to smile to him. He was simply an actor, overwhelmed by his role. Without waiting, I closed my eyes, called my father with all my soul, and sped up my breathing. I was already a giant wound, and thus I wanted to speed up things. I was tired to see the time stretched to infinity. And that is what happened. After a Roman screamed something in his language, Nathanael mumbled 3 or 4 words, and I felt the sharp side of the nail against my wrist. He was hesitating where to place it. A dull blow, and the pain exploded in me with an incredible violence. A horrible scream came out of my chest, impossible to retain. Then, in the same flash, a second and a third blow banged on that nail which was now traversing my wrist and riveting it to the wood. My arm twitched immediately, and I moaned. Again, things seemed to happen in slow motion. The wind blew. A soldier said some insults. I opened my eyes, and in a fog, I saw Nathanael vomiting on the ground. A Roman kicked him, insulted him, and Nathanael left, crawling in the dirt and the mud. One more time I closed my eyes until some women's screams were heard in the crowd. Was this from Miriam? From my mother? I was hoping that they would not attend this horror, that Yusuf or Nicodemus would have pushed them far away. Was it possible to call Elohim to make sure it was so? Could a scout ship take them away in a wave of compassion? Compassion. At this moment, I doubted it even existed. Not so much for me, but for all the ones who had followed me and to whom I was asking so much. And suddenly it was my second wrist. With a single and precise blow, my wrist was pierced by the metal all the way to the wood. I did not scream, but my body jolted as if it was touched by lightning. Quickly, they got to my legs. They folded them, forcing a torsion of my hips until the soles of the feet were flat against the trunk. The man in charge knew his job very well. It only took 2 blows to go through my feet, without a single hesitation. Here I did not scream. The pain at the limit of what was bearable was real. The pain was invading all my flesh, but I was so focused on the energy inside me that I managed to lock away my animal nature. Finally, as my breathing was almost escaping my control, I felt that the soldiers were trying to lift the cross and placed it into a hole in the dirt. I remember to be swallowed by a giant vertigo by this motion and the impact of the cross falling in the hole. I felt that my entire carcass was going to crack and shatter in multiple pieces. Only the ropes were holding me at this point. I needed to keep my eyes open to not pass out. A clamor came out of the crowd, followed by the silence, torn by the gusts of wind, and the screams of the 2 other men crucified next to me. If only I had enough strength to talk to them. Whatever it was, I kept my eyes open. I opened them as much as possible. For one more time, do what I liked most: meet other people's gazes. Held by this willingness, I found my mother and the tender and wild Miriam. Behind them were Martha, Eleazar, Thomas, Jacob, Philip, Yusuf, and Nicodemus. Finally, near a pile of rocks and wood, I found Simon and his wife, Shlomit, Yakuba, and Tade. They were all love for me, but the love eaten by the fears. How could it be otherwise? The muscles of my face did not respond anymore, and thus I tried to smile to them with my eyes. Then came a moment where, letting my gaze fly over the crowd, my consciousness expanded by itself, as it happened to me quite often. Such expansions were always accompanied of lucidity and made me enter in the heart of thoughts and words. I received the thoughts of a man in a corner. So, Rabbi, you who seem to control so many things, I knew that one day they would corner you. They would not miss you. Another thought was saying, Look, it is strange. He is not feeling good. He is hurting. Since he has wings, supposedly he should try to escape. Receiving all these thoughts, I closed my eyes to better read inside me. Words from the Venerable during my stay at the Carmel school came back to my mind with the same precision than if I had heard them yesterday. When you fly too high, Yeshua, you attract jealousy, and to say it plainly, you attract shit. Sometimes, even from people that we think are close to us. The wounds of the eagle pleases the finch, you see? That is so, but this motivates the eagle to fly even higher. I told myself that what he had offered me on that day was beautiful, so beautiful and true, beside the fact that I did not consider myself stained by anyone, even by Judas, who in his own way was crucified at the same time as I was. All this was nothing more than men carrying secret wounds and others who did not understand anything. Suddenly, I felt that someone was approaching. I opened my eyes. It was a simple soldier. At the tip of a long pole, he was presenting me a ball of moist fabric. I knew what it was. They were offering to absorb a little bit of wine mixed with some myrrh. This mixture was supposed to numb the pain. I do not know exactly, but I refused it. Maybe I wanted to be sure to leave everything, to understand it all, without any alteration. It was, it was not to bury myself in more pain, as some pretended it. Pain is not bringing redemption. It is definitely not in the pain that the Christic Energy operated its work through me. Again, my eyes went over the crowd. The people were trying to get closer to me. Still silent, the crowd created a movement, forcing the Roman soldiers to push it back with their shields. It is there, in the heart of these crowd motions, that I found the faces of two of Heliopolis' brothers. In front of them was a third face, who grasped my attention by its familiarity and its kindness. He was so old that I had to rewind my memory to find his identity. It was the face of Master Lyamas, my ancient master and teacher from Nagar in eastern India. Therefore, he had been informed of my destiny for a long time and had traveled such long journey to be a witness of this tragic event. Seeing him, my heart filled up with such joy that I found the strength to unclench my jaws to smile to him. With his head and wisdom in his eyes, he addressed me a little sign. A moment later, after another motion of the crowd, I tried to find him again. No success. There it is, I told myself. It is the sign, the final seal of a loop which is closing in order for another one to open. I was going to leave while the energy was growing in me. It was a cosmic evidence. My life was conforming to the universal gift. However, one last time I had to call the song of the Shruti in me. I needed to tune it to what was left in my body as the pain was becoming now and more intense. My eyes closed themselves. One more time. I tried breathing deeply. I needed that so much. It was impossible. My diaphragm was cramping. It was blocked, and more spasms were running through my whole body. Haun, Haun, I screamed in my soul. You mingle to me. I mingle to you. Where are we going? Tell me. I started coughing. I was suffocating while cramps were attacking my arms and my legs. I do not know how long I stayed like this, focused on the beating of my heart and the tiny amount of air I could inhale through my mouth. My chin resting on top of my chest, I was no longer feeling the freshness of the wind or the sun coming in and out of the clouds. A sun which was not warming up anything. And time was stretching to infinity. How long had I been suspended to that cross? I had heard that such torture could last up to 2 days. I did not want that. At one point, I felt something on my lips. It was the same soldier offering the wine with the myrrh. This time I took some, pinching the fabric with my lips. The pain was no longer acceptable. Perhaps the myrrh would help me to find a refuge into my soul. I started to lose completely the notion of time. The hourglass was almost empty. I had given everything I had. I could only see a blinding, immaculate light between my eyes. In it, no anger, No rebellion, only peace. It was just my body which was screaming, the animal, the machine of flesh, the raw bone marrow. Already a part of me, my essential, had started to travel and was ready to detach. Within my own silence, I heard myself whisper, "Is that all I want? Is it over? And you, Elohim, where are you?" However, in the highest of my consciousness, I knew that it was not over and that I still had to maintain the flame. Very far from my ears of flesh, I heard the screams and agonies of the other crucifieds. I prayed that they cross the gate immediately, without the savage need to shatter their legs. And then suddenly, nothing. Nothing because there was nothing else to hear, nothing to breathe, nothing to feel, nothing to say with words, and nothing to see through forms. An absolute bliss, a total absence of suffering, a soft trembling of all my being, whose unspeakable paroxysm came to reside in the heart of my chest. All the life of the living was concentrated there, loving, singing, and also screaming. What was filling me so much was coming out of my flesh and of my light. Thus, what had sublimed me was flying away. The sun was leaving me. In a flash, I fell into a horrible abyss. I was an old used man that my father was abandoning to himself, a man whose animal carcass had only one chance left, to call its brothers from the stars. Thus a word like a scream of liberation came out of my inners. Elohim, Elohim, lama sabachthani. Elohim, Elohim, my guides, my brothers, my friends, why are you abandoning me? I then pushed another scream inside me, a scream that nobody ever heard, a scream that I had learned as part of the Shruti during my years in the land of the high snows. It was a scream that the wise man can use to get out of his vehicle of flesh in a state of extreme survival. Another explosion, and everything opened up in front of my eyes of light. I saw everything in the most serene light, far away from the tears, the cries, and the blows, so far also from the cold, the wind, and the rays of the sun, which was no longer one. I was gliding like a bird above that place named Golgotha, and I was permeating everything with an endless love. That was it. Everything was done, and I was free. It was over, and still everything was starting. Thus, I let the body of my consciousness come and go, embracing these two men hung like miserables not far from me, kissing the face of Miriam, the face of my mother, and other numerous faces were, by now, rivers of tears. I even whispered into the ears of the old Liamas, who was hiding under a coat. Then I searched for my uncle, who was speaking actively with a Roman. He did not feel the hand I placed on his shoulder. A long time passed, when nothing happened. Only the screams of birds flying high in the sky could be heard. Then a decurion took a long spear and walked slowly to my body. It did not go very far, and as a soldier that I had not seen before, apparently a centurion, rushed on his path and took the spear out of his hands. I recognized him. It was Caius Vorenus. Oh, did I tell myself inside my soul, who was still floating in its sphere of light. Oh, yes, yes, I knew what the centurion was going to do and why he wanted to be the one to do it. When Caius Vorenus arrived at the foot of my cross, spear in hand, I could read his soul. It was the soul of a man devastated, but a man who was still hoping. It was also the soul of a man who never could have guessed the, the importance of what he was about to do, him and not another one. Without any emotion, from the space where I was, I watched him get slowly closer to the lower part of my thorax. With his spear, I saw him hesitate, shake a little bit, and then with a small and precise blow, he pushed the metal of the spear in my right diaphragm. The blow did not hurt me, even if I no longer was in my body. The subtle link between my soul and my body told me that my flesh was now breathing much better, as a clear liquid was oozing out of my new wound. There was so much tranquility in me that I did not even pay attention to the weather that was starting to unleash its revenge on Jerusalem. The sky was considerably dark, and lightnings were creating streaks in it, while a heavy rain was starting to come down. For my soul, none of this existed, really. Oh, did I say, wholeness nourished of vacuum, vacuum gorged of wholeness, all is equal, just and absolute. No life, no death, simply the apex. My mother, Miriam, and a few others were now authorized to get closer to my body. Their faces were swollen by endless tears. While gliding to them, a bubble of nostalgia confirmed to me that I no longer was the Christ, but simply Yeshua, the man. That bubble was telling me that the Christic Energy had come out of me definitely in order to give me back my human life. Vertigo. Was I supposed to let go of everything? Abandon that body practically destroyed under me? Or, on the contrary, do everything possible to re-enter it again? Would that make sense? Then there was the noise of a horse galloping. I saw a soldier handing a message to the Roman who was in charge of the executions. I also saw my uncle Yusuf run to him while he was starting to read out loud the message. Tiberius was ordering additional inquiries, and Yeshua's execution was put on hold. I heard Miriam scream. It was a short and tearing scream, followed by the declaration of the decurion who had removed my robe. I'm afraid it's already too late. The man had pronounced these words coldly while pointing his gaze towards my body, suspended and immobile. Silence. Not a single sound. Nothing. A total paralysis. The rain intensified, as if its intelligence had decided to wash and clean everything. Finally, before leaving the mount, the Roman official said, "It is good. You can take his body back." At this point, Uncle Yusuf and Nicodemus, were throwing orders around. Using my last reserve of will, I saw a dozen of men panting and stomping in the mud, lay my body flat on the ground with its cross. I have the memory to have partially re-entered my body. Between two states of consciousness, I recognize the silhouettes of Nicodemus, of Thaddee, Thomas, Simon, and Eleazar, among others. Finally, I heard a voice, almost a whisper. "The Master, look! There is still blood oozing from his wounds. He is alive." Hearing this, I projected my heart to a wound, and everything stopped. I do not recall feeling the removal of the nails from my wrists and feet, or the ropes around my arms and chest. A coma was swallowing me. All was dark.